Hi everyone, good morning. It's good to see the energy and enthusiasm in Kerala and Kochi in general. I'm Saikat. I lead the mergers and acquisitions and strategy function at Nazara Technologies. Nazara, as you may be aware, is the only listed gaming and esports company. So please do go and check out the investor presentations. You'll get a lot more information there as well. But in addition to that, today the idea is to present to you some of the questions that I get interacting with a lot of smaller studios, a lot of independent developers, a lot of students, etc. to understand the emerging trends in gaming. And this basically encompasses all sets of questions that I get to in a more digestible manner so that people can understand and take some benefits out of it. To start the presentation, let me do a broad survey and a quick check. If you can just show me some hands on who among you all are actually students who are trying to get into the gaming scene, trying to develop the games. Can you kindly raise your hands, please? Good to see students. Welcome to this industry, and I hope you all the very best. Who among you are just starting into the gaming ecosystem? Started the studio or trying to identify some genres. Can you please show your hands, please? Perfect. And who among you are probably some of the larger studios have been crazy enough to be associated with this industry for considerably more than 2 years, 3 years or so? Good to see you. Right, welcome. So this presentation probably helps everyone. So if a particular question is not in your mind, kindly bear some patience with me, and maybe it would help your other peers. Right, so can you switch to the presentation mode, please? Right, so one of the first questions that I get is how big is the games market? What has been some of the trends in 2022? What can we expect in 2023 and so on, right? In order to highlight that, this particular graph shows you that gaming today is more than movies, books and music combined. It has been true for the last couple of years now, but it is now emerging stronger than ever. It is now innovating at a breakneck speed to further increase and enhance its revenues. Now, each and every one of these industries are large in and of themselves, but gaming is somehow dominating them, and we'll see in a couple of slides why that is essentially the case. When it comes to breakdown in terms of geographies and platforms, mobile is typically the largest market. In 2022, the mobile market was $92 billion. That's a B. The second market is console, which stands at 52 billion, and the third market is PC, which stands at 40 billion, including the browser PC games as well. Right? In terms of geographies, China and US are probably the largest geographies, contributing roughly 50% of overall revenues worldwide. Right? It's just 90 billion. These two markets are massive, and definitely you should have an eye out on the emerging genres in these two geographies. India, as you see, we have a massive player base, right? 500 billion plus player base, and we have 2.6 billion, and that is when we are not spending money on in-app purchases. So imagine the level that we can get to if all of them start spending even a small 1% blip in overall in-app purchases, right? When it comes to trends, what happened in 2022 was it declined in revenues. Now there are a bunch of reasons why we saw a decline in 2022 revenues, primarily because of macro environments, the interest rates spiking up, funding environment is slowed down. A lot of the startups actually started focusing or optimizing for their bottom line instead of focusing on the top line growth, and therefore you are seeing the drop in overall revenues. However, if you see the number of players in 2022 compared to 2021, we saw the inverse effect. The number of players actually increased. That indicates that this industry is standing strong, and it's a minor short-term blip, which you can see in 2023 revenues as well. They will pick up and be better than 2021 as 2021 going forward in this particular year. Now, one of the other questions that I get is, so I'm making a PC and a console game, right? What are some of the key markets that I should focus on? I've already mentioned US and China as one of the key markets, but what are some of the key markets that I should focus on, and what are some of the emerging trends in the PC and console market that we can expect going into the future? This particular graph shows you first the geography, and second what are the monetization models that are picking up. On the geography side, as you would have imagined, US is the number one geography with 29 billion of the 92 billion that is present. So that's roughly around 33% of overall market. China is second with $15 billion, and you can see Europe and APAC together is a significant market to consider as well, and identify the genres which are really, really popular in these two geographies to launch your game. In terms of monetization model, you can see still in the PC and console market, full game download and premium downloads are probably the best monetization model available in PC and console market today. But microtransactions, which is basically in-app purchase for PC and console, they are picking up, and the next slide basically shows the importance of microtransaction model-led PC and console game. So in 2022, 13 out of the top 20 games were actually launched with a free-to-play mechanic or an in-app purchase or a microtransaction model mechanic. That indicates that while the premium model can be the highest, the free-to-play model is fast catching up, and you should definitely think about how to implement the free-to-play mechanics in your PC and console game if you are into the PC and console market. The other trend also is that while the console market is bigger than PC market, 12 of the top 20 free-to-play games were actually released on PC. So PC and in-app purchase market are actually taking the PC and console market by storm, and you can see some slight improvement in terms of overall market share when it comes to this market of $90 billion roughly. Right? Then the next question I get is, so I'm making a new game, what sort of genre should I focus on? What should be my core strength that I should build my capabilities on, right? In order to highlight that, I would just want to take, and thank you to our data partner Sensor Tower for making this presentation possible. So I want to highlight you what are the various nuances when it comes to genres and genre identification for various markets. So the left hand side of the graph basically shows the match genre, so match 3, merge, multiple match games including Candy Crush Saga is something that you can see on the left side, and on the right side you can see social casino. Now, 3 of the biggest key markets for mobile are United States, Japan and South Korea. Of course, China is also one of the biggest markets, bigger than probably US. But it's difficult to get the data for China because of multiple app stores present. It's just not Google Play and Apple App Store. And therefore, it's very difficult to track data for China market. Now, if you look at the trends here, Japan and South Korea are contributing extremely less when it comes to both these genres, match and social casino, right? While US takes the lion's share of revenues in these two genres. So definitely if you're making a game in these genres, your target market should be US, and you should focus US, Western Europe, North America, maybe even Latin America, Brazil, Argentina is some of the geographies that you should focus on. But if you look at the RPG genre, right, this is the role-playing game genre, US, although being a larger market, is not taking as much share as Japan and South Korea. It's even lesser than both the markets individually, which indicates that the players in this geography are actually preferring role-playing game. The second aberration in this would also be strategy genre, which is very, very popular in China. It probably surpassed all of the numbers that you are seeing here every single year. And so you should definitely take it into consideration when you are deciding to launch a new game. What is my target market? Which genre should I focus on? What is my core capabilities, etc. And hence decide on the new game that we are trying to launch. Right? So this was the section where we covered some of the basic tenets of how the market is looking like, what's the outlook, what are the various genres, etc. Happy to sort of answer any of your questions offline, but this is what I could do in a very short while. Now, moving on from the current status to what could be, what are the various trends that are emerging out in the gaming ecosystem overall. And here the question that I get is, a lot is happening, how should I focus on things, how should I create my mental model, how should I think about things in general, etc. Right? So this is my brief attempt to answer some of those questions. Now, the reason why mobile gaming and gaming in general has been larger than all the other forms of media and entertainment is primarily because the mobile ecosystem has always been about democratizing things, making it simpler for either the developers to make new games or players to access them and play them. It has always been about that. Now, if you look at on the top side, it is the way players are engaging with the games, right? You have on one hand arcade, which is you have to go somewhere, pay and then start playing for a limited amount of time. Versus now on mobile, where you can download a particular game online, sitting at your home, maybe lazing around in a couch, etc. And you can actually start playing without paying any money and probably ever, right? So that is how the overall democratization of how the players are playing is actually evolving. On the bottom side, you can see how the games, how developers, how the ecosystem has actually democratized the environment wherein developers can actually launch new games, right? So on first you had premium games, which were really, really popular for the old era arcade console and maybe early handheld devices including PCs, were really popular. But then with the emergence of free-to-play, and we saw a couple of slides ago how free-to-play is taking over the PC and console market, the free-to-play genre emerged, which basically made it more accessible for players to play and developers to develop these games, because these required lesser time to develop compared to a premium game which is more experience focused. Then came the hyper-casual revolution with ad monetization. Now 2 or 3 people, independent studios, can generate a game or create a game, launch the game, and probably earn in millions of dollars, right? We have success stories, and I'm sure some of you are sitting here as well. Then came the real money gaming part of it, which made the betting part of it, not the betting, the wagering part of it really, really easy for players. And then we have the next revolution, which is play and earn, where we feel that the true ownership of the assets can actually focus on. So all these new technologies in terms of business models, in terms of platforms, are actually making games more accessible for players, or making games development more easy for more and more developers to create games. This is the core framework on which the entire game development ecosystem works. This has always been the way in which we would progress. So any new technology, if it is helping us democratize the way we make games, the way we distribute games, the way players are engaging with the games, then that's a great thing, and that is how we should think in terms of first principles. The most common question that I get these days is, how should I look at generative AI? Can it actually improve my game and my studio, right? So I'll give you this broad mental map on how generative AI can actually help you. Now, if you look at this triangle, cost, time, scope triangle, you can optimize for the 2 elements of the 3 that I mentioned, and will not be able to optimize the third one. So if you're optimizing for cost and time, then the scope of the work has to be limited. But if you're optimizing for cost and scope, then your time taken for developing a new game would probably increase. So your costs are low, your scope is very wide, so you take more time to develop the games. Now what generative AI is typically doing is they are reducing the cost and the time, right? So now it enables the developers to focus on the scope bit a lot more meaningful manner. Now the scope can probably be making new games within your own core loop, so probably launching more mini games so that it could reach or attract more organic users for you. Probably reduce your live operations content treadmill cycle, or you could actually focus on creating more engaged games or more engagement driven games with much more deeper content, deeper narrative, emergent gameplays, and a bunch of other things. And that's how you would increase the scope, or you would be able to increase the scope by use of generative AI. Right? This is how we look at the overall life cycle and how and where we could probably be, right? So studio, game, players and creators basically form the ecosystem of any games development, game studio in this particular slide. And generative AI basically touches all these 4 tenets of the game development ecosystem. On the studio side, if you remember the old days when there was no automation, the studios were making their own backend, their own front end, their own SDKs to be integrated across multiple platforms, to now where things are more streamlined, you have no-code, low-code tools, etc., which is democratizing the game-making process in itself, to level 4 where we currently are on the studio side, where we can actually deploy certain partial AI, generative AI pipelines in our art, content. It is still very much human dependent, but it is still making things easier for independent studios to generate more ideas, generate more creatives, test new ideas which ideally would have taken 4 weeks or 5 weeks, which you could not potentially give from your core development that you're quite actively working on. So this is how the studios will be the first adapters of generative AI, and you should actively think about how to adapt this technology into your pipelines today if you not have already. On the game side, if you remember, today we make a lot of games which are static in nature. So any user across any platform who is playing the game will have exactly the same code loop and the same progression within the game, right? Eventually we feel that the content will itself be generative enough and they will be more adaptive. We now have in some games procedural content which are rule based. So if a player interacts in a particular way, the game will evolve in a particular direction, but still we are not in a position today where we can create those loops as and when the player plays and as and when the player interacts with multiple systems. So this will be the second step where the generative AI can potentially help create more immersive content through emergent gameplays and how the players are interacting and adapting the game. So the game itself becomes a creator of the title itself and how it should evolve. On the third side, which is really important because I believe that user-generated content in UGC games are going to be the future and would lead the next round of growth in the gaming industry. Here, if you look at the player side of things, how players have been creating games, they have traditionally been hacker-led mods. So the game itself did not allow any changes. The hackers started experimenting with the code base. You need to have very deep architectural understanding of the game, how the code base is built, etc. And hackers went ahead because of the deep passion they had about the game, and they changed the core game loop, and this is what you could see potentially with old games, with the cheat codes and a bunch of other things, right? They inserted some comical things within the core gameplay to make it more interesting. Now we are in an environment, we are in an industry where we have platforms like Roblox and Minecraft, which can actually help developers create meaningful content within these platforms through very simple scripting languages. So you don't need to know the code base, the architecture, multiple other things. You can simply script the game, you can launch the game for other people to enjoy, and it's a massive billion-dollar industry in and of itself. You should definitely go out and check Roblox's annual reports as well. We here in the player and creator economy, we would potentially reach in a position where it is highly generative. Imagine a TikTok for games or a YouTube for games where anybody can create games, launch it on the platform for others to enjoy. It could be short games, it could be long games, it could be engaging games, it could engage players for a very long period of time, but essentially TikTok and YouTube platform for games will democratize how players or developers are making games, including players are making games, and how other creators are making games on these platforms and earning millions and millions of dollars every year. This is the market map of generative AI. These are some of the tools. Please don't worry, I'll share this presentation with you towards the end of this session. This is the set of tools which today we have actively deployed, which you can basically hook your pipelines, your art ecosystems, infrastructures, etc., and generate meaningful content. And you are basically free to use these tools as you see fit. But I would recommend you to constantly check Product Hunt, Future Tools, Easy with AI, or any of these other platforms to see where the market is evolving, and it is evolving quite rapidly. Right? The next question is, what are UGC games and how does it help my gameplay? So typically UGC games are the games, so you can imagine Roblox or Minecraft as the best examples of user-generated content-led gaming platforms. There are other platforms as well, which is Rec Room, Super Mario Maker, Roll20, etc. Now this is a market map as well, which taken from E16Z blog, which basically indicates that user-generated content platform can be thought of as a platform-led or a game-led. By platform-led, I mean platform becomes the core product. Based on that platform, you can create any genre of games or same genre of games. And on the game-first content, it is centered around a single core loop. Around that game, you can create either mini games, some engaging content, some live operations with that core loop, etc. So I would urge you to take a look at this at a later point of time, and happy to help you if you find any questions there. Right. Other questions that I get is, what is real money skill-based gaming? What is paid competitive gaming? What is skill-based gaming? And a bunch of other things. And should I even consider as a small developer to enhance my monetization channel? So here I would like to highlight a couple of things. So as you saw, the 2022 year, we saw a decline in overall free-to-play revenues, right? Despite the decline in overall calendar year 22 revenues, we could still see that this particular industry grew by 45% in 2022 versus 2021. And this growth is not just India-led, this is led by US, Mexico, UK, Germany, and a bunch of other things. So this is a global phenomena, this is a global business model that is emerging, and India is at the forefront at the number 2 geography, right? There are a bunch of leading Western players, including Skills, Papaya Gaming, Avia Gaming, and a bunch of other players that you should definitely keep in mind when you're thinking about how to enhance the monetization from the game that you've already created. Interact with Indian studios, including Nazara. There are a bunch of other studios as well that you should definitely interact with to identify what is the real scope of this and how it can help you to generate more money for your publisher to focus on content even better. The next question I get is, what is a Web3 in general, and why should I even look at Web3? What are the traditional use cases that a Web3 would solve that a centralized platform isn't able to solve, or at least that the decentralized platform would be able to solve that a centralized platform is not, right? I would like to highlight here a fact that any game asset that you buy in an in-app purchase transaction on a free-to-play economy is not an ownership transfer. You don't own anything. So if you have bought anything, if you have earned anything by watching an advertisement, you don't own that asset. What you own is a license to use that asset in the game for a limited period of time. This is clearly written in the end user license agreement, which we don't read, of course. So what Web3 at its core is trying to focus on is to give players that ownership. Now imagine an era where we used to sell physical DVDs, CDs for games and cassettes and a bunch of other things, right? Chipsets and a bunch of other things for our games in the old era. You owned that asset. You could actually go to the markets such as GameStop and a bunch of other players, and you can resell those markets, and there was a thriving reselling market that was available. With the advent and publishers did not want to do that because it ate away their revenues, of course. There was less number of copies that were being sold. So developers did not want to do that. So what emerged, and they tried to restrict it by, asking for an email ID or a gen key and a bunch of other things. But what happened with the digital era and the digital distribution of games is that they could easily and effectively take away their ownership of the players that bought a particular asset within the game, or maybe even the game itself, and they could restrict the users from reselling it to another peer that you would want to. There are a bunch of reasons why that would have been the case, why it was difficult for the developers to implement that, because you don't know that it could be the money out could be used for nefarious activities, including money laundering and illicit activities, etc. And it was extremely tough for these developers to actually operate like a financial firm, like a bank, and there was no entity basically that was backing them up. So that's where the free-to-play economy and the digital licensing basically starts to take place. Web3, what they're trying to do is they're trying to make it more democratic, and I again come back to my first principles. They're trying to make the game ownership more democratic, and therefore you should definitely keep an eye out, even though we know that today the market is mired with a lot of scams, but you should definitely keep an eye out. This is something that is going to change eventually, with good engaging games coming into the picture, long life of these games, and how the assets are being transferred and how the value is being stored. So you should definitely keep an eye out and an open mind to identify the opportunities that you could explore in future. Just to close this thought, if there are, so I do get towards the end, tell me more, like what's more is there that I may be missing today. Here I would like to highlight 3-4 points broadly. So transmedia typically is now on the rise. So if you look at the graph on the left side, you have Cyberpunk Edge Runner, which was launched in the month of August 22. Cyberpunk, as we all know, is mired with a lot of conspiracies, a lot of less copies sold, a lot of development time wasted. They could not basically develop the game that the users expected. But Cyberpunk Edge Runner is a Netflix series in an anime style that was launched in August 22. It basically shot up the re-engagement levels of Cyberpunk game itself, and the MAUs for Cyberpunk increased in the month of September. So this is definitely a good way for users to engage through transmedia. Now, what I mean by transmedia is not just launching the content of the IP in another platform, but actually, so imagine if a Marvel movie was launched. So Marvel Endgame was launched as a movie, and the Infinity Stones was launched as a game, right? So this is what I call by transmedia. So different platforms, which is ensuring the continuity of the title, is launched on different ways in which players can engage. That is what transmedia is, and that is where I think the world will probably evolve. Then it's IP adoption and adaptation, which basically Mario Brothers Illumination Studio, I think it's a great movie. So it has been the top grossing movie ever from a studio that has already created hit titles like Despicable Me and Sing and a bunch of other good ones, right? So definitely game and movies is something that we should definitely keep our eye out. The next is cross-platform play. So if you remember Fall Guys, how it picked up in traction at the time of COVID, Fall Guys was reluctant or maybe slow enough to enter into the mobile market. They were beaten up by Kitka Games, which was later acquired by Scopely. And Kitka Games basically created Stumble Guys, which was inspired heavily by Fall Guys themselves, and they are doing phenomenally well. So if your game is doing well on one platform, always think about how to create that particular experience in another platform that basically helps users to engage with your game in a much more meaningful manner. And then always keep an eye out as a last point for alternate platforms, including Netflix, Apple Arcade, Google Play Pass, and a bunch of other subscription-based platforms. This can help you generate consistent amount of revenues across the life cycle of the game. With that, I will take it a pause, and if you have any questions, happy to answer them. Perfect. So you could download this presentation by scanning this code, and you could reach out to me at any time on LinkedIn, WhatsApp, whatever, by scanning the code on your right-hand side.